All right, so sprint burndown charts. Everyone wants to know, what is a sprint burndown chart? How do I create one? How do I read one? When I'm presented with one in an interview and they want to know what's going on the team, how do I read it? Well, I'm going to answer at least one, maybe two of those questions here in this video. In this video, I want to help you understand how to create a sprint burndown chart. Now, caveat here first, before we even get started. Sprint burndown charts are no longer part of Scrum. They actually haven't been part of Scrum for a very long time. I'm not sure the exact year that they were removed from Scrum, but I think it was somewhere between 2007 and 2009. With that being said, let's get into how do we create a sprint burndown chart. Let's go draw one. Okay, with the sprint burndown chart, the first thing that you want to do is draw your Y and X axis. Your Y-axis, which will be vertical, that will represent the amount of work that the team has planned for the sprint. And the X-axis, the horizontal axis, that will represent the amount of time that we have for this sprint. So let's go ahead and let's draw those two axes. There's our Y-axis. That will be for the amount of work for this sprint. There's our X-axis. That will represent the amount of time for this sprint. Now let's go ahead and label these axes. Now let's go ahead and make our tick marks on both the X-axis and the Y-axis to see where we're going to be able to plot lines. For this team, they are doing a 2-week sprint. That's 10 working days in the sprint. So we have 10 tick marks across the bottom to represent the 10 days of the sprint. And they are going to do 90 points of work, whatever 90 points of work actually means for them. Please excuse my scribbles. I've redrawn this chart so many times and messed up every single time that I'm just going to go with messing up the 30 and the 40 there. So sorry for the scribbles here. Now let's label the days of the sprint. Okay, so we have 10 days in the sprint. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to draw your ideal line. I like drawing my ideal line in blue, so let's add the ideal line. All right, the ideal line's not perfect and it's not easy drawing in markers without a straight edge. So let's imagine that blue line stopped right here at the intersection of the X-axis at 10 days of work. So what is this ideal line anyway? If you don't know what the ideal line is, it is the perfect working down of work all the way throughout the sprint, so that from the very first second of the sprint all the way to the very last second of the last day of the sprint, if you worked in a perfect way, you would at the very end of the sprint burn down the very last bit of work. We're not robots, we're human beings. We don't work this way. So let's just say the ideal line is probably not going to happen to us. What we're going to do in real life is every day or several times a day, depending on how your team operates, we are going to indicate on the chart where we are with the amount of work we have left this sprint. So this may not look very pleasing to you, but here's what probably is going to happen on your first day of work. Let's draw the burn down line in red. We came out straight out from the very first moment of the first day of the sprint, and at the end of the first day of the sprint, we have not completed any work. So we have not burned down any work. So at the end of the first day of work, we're indicating that we still have 90 points of work left. Let's say the next time somebody marks anything on the chart, it's at lunchtime on the second day of work. So halfway between 1 and 2, lunchtime on day 2, we're going to mark it somewhere in the middle here, and we're going to see what happens when somebody takes off, let's say 5 points off the chart, because they finished a 5-point user story. First thing I did was I made a red dot right at the middle of the day on day 2, and right at 5 points being burned down from the original 90. Then I connected the original red line to that dot to burn the work down. What some teams will do is they will make a note right on that dot for what happened. If you're using an electronic tool to create your burn down charts, well, you're probably not very interested in how to draw this in the first place. But what you can also do on some electronic charts is annotate comments. This is what I would do. Every time somebody burns down work, just make a comment on it. If you are drawing your burn down charts on paper, maybe put a sticky note on there with the comment that you want to make. Sometimes, and I have done this plenty of times in the past, just draw right on the chart. So let's do that. So I made a note here that at lunchtime on the second day of work, Sumitro and Jeff closed out item S-1234. It must have been a 5-point story because they burned it down 5 points. This tells the complete story of what was going on with Sumitro and Jeff as far as the chart is concerned. It does not tell the absolute complete story that Sumitro and Jeff might have had this done at the end of the day on day 1 if they didn't have a small impediment at the end of the day. Those types of stories don't get told on these burn down charts. And that's why some of these charts are so dangerous. They don't tell the full story. Let's see what happens if the entire team experiences an impediment. Let's say the team does not have access to a database that they need access to for the work that they're doing this sprint. And they go an entire work day from the middle of the day on day 2 to the middle of the day on day 3, no one getting any work done at all. This is what that would look like. I made another red dot in between, halfway in between days 2 and 3 to say that in the middle of day 2, the team took a temperature reading and decided we have gotten no work done since Jeff and Sumitro finished that story 1, 2, 3, 4 yesterday. So they make a point on the chart and they just draw a horizontal line from one dot to the other. Now, if the dots are this close together and you want to make sure that the story is more obvious, what you can do is you can draw an arrow from the comment on the board to the dot on the board that it aligns with, like this. I just drew a small arrow from the bottom of that comment to the dot. Before that arrow was in place, someone could have come up to the chart and said, well, that comment refers to that dot. I don't know what's going on here. Even though those two things don't line up correctly, like the story about Jeff and Sumitro finishing that story and there being a horizontal line here, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, that story that person assumed, but that assumption can be made. So let's make it obvious. This comment goes with that dot. Let's say that the next thing that happens is the entire Scrum team got together, resolved the database access issue, and a whole lot of work got finished by the end of the day on day 2. So at the end of the day on day 2, everyone came up to the chart and started marking off their work. Remember, the end of the day on day 2 and the beginning of the day on day 3 are pretty much the same thing. So they are going to mark this on the day 3 line. Okay, so at the end of the day on day 2, it looks like we have 2 2-point stories getting done, an 8-point story getting done, and another 3-point story getting done. Let's take a look at these. Okay, so at the end of the day on day 2, or if we want to say the beginning of the day on day 3, we took a temperature reading and we find that Alexi and Zhu finished item S801, which must have been a 5-point story. Kurt and Sri were able to finish item 994, which looks like it would have been a 1 or a 2-point story. Bo and Sal did 793, which looks like it was a 1 or a 2-point story. Mark and Kyle finished 1780, which looks like it was an 8-point story. And Lou did one by himself, and that was issue 89. I guess that one's been hanging around for a really long time. It was a 3-point story. Lou did that one by himself, and it looks like we burned down 15 points total. We may be on the ideal line right now, but that doesn't mean things are ideal. We did go far out to the right and then came straight down. Sometimes these patterns are good, sometimes these patterns are not so good. We have to know the story of what's going on in the team to be able to tell if the story is actually good or bad. Now, all throughout the sprint, this will keep happening. As work gets finished, we will burn the line down. So let's say by the end of day 4, they've made it to about 50 points left in the sprint. So let's just say it comes straight out to the end of day 4 and then comes straight down. We could make a comment there, but now I'm just making stuff up. Okay, so let's say now they're below the ideal line. That means they're burning work down or burning work off at a rate that's faster than the ideal line. Well, this is going to happen. Sometimes we're going to be going slower than ideal. Sometimes we're going to be going faster than ideal. As long as the average between being slower than ideal and faster than ideal, as long as the average somehow makes it really, really close to the blue line, we're probably good. Okay? Those are the basics of the burn down chart. When we start talking about how to recognize certain patterns and what to do about them, I'll make another video that will actually be a premium content video or a paid video. Okay, so that's pretty much pretty much the basics here. What might it look like? Well, I mean, we could come up with other scenarios here. It's probably going to turn out to look something like this. It's going to come down and then maybe out to here, come down some more. Might have something like that happen. Okay, these are common patterns too, but I'm not going to get into those on this video. Okay, anyway, that's the Sprint Burndown Chart. Not much more to say about the basics of it. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the basics of a Sprint Burndown Chart. I hope that you found this presentation, this explanation, whatever you want to call this. I hope you found this video useful. If you want to send me an email, please email at wisdom@yscrum.com. And feel free to join me over on LinkedIn. I go by Agile Rick. So thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.